Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
If you'd taken £1 out of your pocket on the eve of the EU referendum, it would have bought you nearly $1.50. Today, it's around 17% less. So what is the effect of a lower pound? Well, sterling suffered the biggest fall of all 150 currencies tracked by Bloomberg in October. At 10 a.m. this morning, the pound was 1.22 against the dollar and 1.11 against the euro. So what does that mean? The falling pound has been a boost in the short term for UK firms who earn profits abroad. The FTSE 100 reached a record high in October as the profits of many international companies are worth more when converted into sterling. A cheaper pound has also made UK goods more competitive. Export volumes grew at their fastest pace for 2.5 years in the 3 months to October. It also makes it more expensive, however, for British consumers buying imported goods, which could push up prices. Inflation is rising at its highest rate for 2 years, reaching 1% in September. The Office of National Statistics, however, cautioned against linking this too explicitly with the fall in sterling. The supermarket Morrisons has already increased the cost of a jar of Marmite by 12.5%. While the chief executive of Thai Food Tea suggested last week that the price of a cuppa could also go up. And what are the prospects for tourism? Well, a cheaper pound could make Britain a more attractive holiday destination for visitors from overseas. But British tourists will find breaks to Europe and the United States more expensive. Well, here with me to discuss this further with Martin Lewis are the Labour MP Stephen Kinnock and Gerard Lyons, Chief Economic Advisor at the Policy Exchange think tank. Welcome to both of you.
Hello.
Gerard Lyons, a good thing or a bad thing, the fall in sterling?
I think it's a good thing, but there are naturally winners and losers from a weaker pound. I think it should be stressed that at some stage the pound was going to fall, whatever the outcome of the referendum. The UK has a very large current account deficit. And at the same time, we need to remember this is not the first time the pound has fallen. Indeed, after the financial crisis, the pound fell by almost a quarter. So we've seen it before. And coming back to your question, there are winners and losers. It's good in the sense it's a competitive boost to the economy. The downside is that it will feed a pickup in inflation, likely to be a temporary pickup in inflation over the next year.
Is there an issue, though, about the speed at which the pound has fallen? I take your point, and many economists share your view, that actually it can be a good thing, that it was overvalued and so on. But the speed of that decline, is that something to be worried about? Last month, it fell by 6% overnight to a 31-year low. Doesn't that suggest a lack of faith in the British economy?
No, it could suggest that, but I think it's more likely to reflect the fact that the pound was overvalued for some considerable time. Even the International Monetary Fund, often cited as an independent group, even though they were far too pessimistic about the UK, they've been saying in recent years the pound's overvalued by somewhere between 10 to 20%. But the thing about the pace and speed of the decline, in the past, when governments have intervened to stop a falling currency, that's created problems. What has been sensible this time is for the authorities to stand back, let the currency fall, find its true level. And at some stage, this will help a rebalancing of the economy in terms of eventually interest rates going higher, even though for the moment, of course, given where the economy is, interest rates, like the pound, need to stay low.
Do you agree it was overvalued, the pound, that it needed to fall, that Brexit or the result of the referendum may have played a part, but it wasn't the whole story about the fall in sterling?
What I think is worrying is the way the pound's fallen off the edge of a cliff. If you look at Black Wednesday back in '92, the pound actually only devalued 4%. Since the 23rd of June, the pound has devalued 15%.
But was that because it was overvalued?
Fall. Well, I think there's, we need to ensure that we have the pound valued at the right level, but it's got to be in a managed sense. What I'm also very concerned about is inflation always hits the poorest in our society hardest. They are the people that are spending on goods that are most affected by inflation. So what this will do is contribute even more to the deeply the unbalanced and unfair nature of the British economy.
But do you think then the fall in the pound has been the trigger to higher inflation?
I think there's no doubt that there's a connection between the fall in the pound and higher inflation, because British companies are having to pay more for bringing their goods in, and that's particularly the case as we've seen, for example, on the Marmite.
Right. I mean, do you agree with that actually there is a direct link between the two?
Well, the pickup in inflation recently is because of events before the pound fell, but the weaker pound inevitably in the next few months, maybe next 6 to 12 months, will lead to higher inflation. But it's important to stress, we saw this before. 2008-09, the pound fell sharply, inflation picked up, profit margins were squeezed.
Sure.
Some of it was passed on, and indeed it hit people across society, and then we saw the inflation subdued again.
Right.
So I think we need to put this in perspective. This is not a permanent pickup in inflation.
Right, you're saying it's not permanent because you're saying we've had this before. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, just because we've experienced it before.
Yeah, but
it does mean that prices will rise, and those prices, particularly on basic goods, if you're looking at fuel and foodstuffs, will hit those who are less well off.
Yeah, we do live in a world economy. Food prices and energy prices have been relatively low. Even without the pound falling, we would have seen a pickup in energy prices because of higher oil prices. But also at the same time, we need to put into context that Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, has accepted that this will be a one-off increase in inflation. And maybe in 18 months' time, one would expect inflation to be quite low again. Well, we haven't had a low period of inflation. So I think we need to not panic too much. And the economy has, post the referendum, still done quite well in terms of economic growth.
What's been the response to people who sign up to your website in terms of prices going up?
Well, look, this is about future prices, really, the issue, as opposed to now. We haven't really seen it come in that heavily, and it won't. I mean, I think we overcomplicate this a bit much. If the pound drops, when we buy stuff from abroad, that gets more expensive, and that feeds through into inflation. No one's going to deny that or argue that. I mean, and actually, you have to look at it. The euro rate is about the same as it was 3 summers ago. And it was roughly about 110, 111 then. It's against the dollar where there's been a real hit. And there is, of course, this is Brexit. The markets don't like Brexit. And therefore, the euro's gone down, the pound's gone down, the dollar hasn't gone down to the same extent. But in terms of factoring through to prices, I mean, there is a big political issue coming. I very strongly suspect this winter, for the first time since 2013, we're going to see big 6 energy price rises, both because of wholesale prices, which is one factor, have gone up, and because of the pound's weakness. So we'll have announcements, I guess, by the end of January of 5% or more rises on energy. Now, that is a big political issue because it focuses the debate very heavily on this. It's a big, solid bill going up in people's homes, and nobody's going to like it.
Right. It has been going on for some time. What do you say to that? Because that is a big hit, and that people really will feel.
Yeah, but there are positives from a weaker pound. The UK is incredibly competitive. We're now incredibly interested for many people looking to put inward investment here, the Chinese, the Japanese.
But I want you to address the point that Martin has actually raised about energy prices, because when you're talking about the boosts and the positives, that obviously benefits a certain group in society, but energy costs rising will hit most people.
I think the issue is, yes. Sorry if you forgive me, the issue is, one is a direct hit, and telling people the economy may be boosted, you'll have an indirect trickle through coming to you, doesn't help people on the ground. People are more selfish than that.
Yeah. Right, energy, look, profit margins in the economy are very high. Profit margins in the economy before the pound fell sharply 5 years ago were very high. What depends on different sectors is the competitive elements in those sectors, whether people take advantage of the opportunity to try and pass on high prices, as we saw recently. But there is no doubt a weaker pound does feed to higher inflation, but you should not attribute the temporary pickup in inflation only to a weaker pound.
I think what we're seeing is the first tremors. Let's remember, we haven't even triggered Article 50 yet. And this is a deeply political, to Martin's point about the politics of this, this is deeply political, not just in the UK, but also in the EU. Donald Tusk has come out and said there will be no soft Brexit. There's either a hard Brexit or no Brexit. And that spooks the markets. It spooks the markets from the pound to the export markets to our financial services industry, which are already talking about moving thousands of jobs influence overseas. The chief executive.
But they've talked about it, and Nissan has just announced, of course, that it's actually going to stay and invest. Let's see.
Who knows what the basis of the deal
was?
Well,
that of course is the devil is in the detail. We need to see exactly what was in that.
Stephen touches on some very good points, but the reality is when you talk to people in the financial markets, they've been reassured by the relative political stability we now have in the UK. We now need to put those policies into effect, both domestically in terms of the domestic regional industrial policy, but also in terms of Article 50. Being outside the single market is pretty good for big chunks of this economy.
Right, but again, this is
relative political stability. We've just delivered a political earthquake on the 23rd of June, which changes everything. So there is no relative political stability.
Well, let's look at the political stability or not, because you said it's been quite good, Gerard Lyons, that there hasn't been government interference in terms of the falling pound. But you could argue that Theresa May's speech at the Conservative conference, which was widely seen as a signal that Brexit, or Britain, was heading for a so-called hard Brexit, no longer being under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and obviously ending freedom of movement, that will have fed instability.
Yeah, talking to international investors, the thing that has worried them more than anything else were the comments by the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary about migration. Because even though we need to have a sensible migration policy, international investors still want to see migration of skilled workers.
Well, that's not political stability then, is it?
No, but that one issue needs to be really clarified. But in terms of other areas, when one thinks
because you don't want to see any limits on immigration.
What I'm saying is that looking back to June, the worry was if we voted to leave, we would have 3 or 4 months of political instability. We now have relative political stability. We now have the Chancellor set in late November to provide an autumn statement that should give another boost to the economy. So we need to actually look at the whole context here. There is clearly, as has been mentioned, the big change post June 23rd. But you're trying to imply lots of it is negative. There's lots of positives in terms of the competitive boost.
Well, no, and you're putting those positives about. Of course, the difference here is who is being affected by what, and the broader economy, as Martin Lewis said, is not the same as the direct economy to people in their pockets.
But
and people will take
high.
will take a view. Let's look at the City of London, because you raised the City of London as an issue, saying that they're actually fairly sanguine about what's going on. Is that your experience, Stephen Kinnock?
The Chief Executive of the British Bankers Association, Anthony Brown, who I assume knows what he is talking about, is saying that the finger is quivering over the relocate button. UBS have come out and said they're going to relocate thousands of jobs. And let's not forget, this is not just about big bankers in the City of London. There are 1.1 million people employed in the financial services industry, from Edinburgh to Glasgow to Cardiff to Leeds. This has systemic impact on the British economy, and you've got Paris and Frankfurt waiting in the wings. We've got to find a deal which gives us equivalence on passporting. If we don't, I fear an exodus from the UK.
I mean, yes, go on.
While I support equivalence on passporting, and I think that is important, first of all, what the BBA says, I wouldn't hold much weight in that. They tend to talk a load of nonsense in my experience most of the time. I think
we've had enough of experts.
Well, it's not. No, it's not experts. They're not experts. They're a trade organisation that tries to talk to all their members, most of whom disagree on things, and they're lobbying. But I think the point is, I think we need to not carefully. Financial services is a big sweep. Investment banking is a small sweep, and is a small number of people. There are big threats to investment banking in the UK, but it's not going to go to Europe. It's going to go to New York, and that's the real competition out there. But we do need to try and protect that industry, because that's what brings in big tax.
Right. Well,
I was going to say that the one thing we have at the moment, one thing we have, and look, we now have the certainty of uncertainty. And that's the truth. Nothing has happened. We've had a vote. Sentiment has changed. That's it.
But uncertainty will lead to a vacuum being created, as people will say.
Inevitably.
But we know there's going to be change, which gives you something that you can plan on. But we don't know what the change is.
Let me ask Gerard Lyons then about on the. Let's have a look at the City of London and financial services. Would you be prepared to negotiate access in a way to the single market, tariff-free access, a very good deal for certain sectors like the City of London? If it means that those rights are going to be secured?
I think, look, how we view the city needs to be seen in context of the whole UK economy, as well as also the fact the wider European economy. I was at dinner last night with the British Bankers Association, UBS and others were there.
Gosh, they have been out and about, haven't they?
And it was a Chatham House rules, but the gist of it was a far more positive discussion about the outlook for the city. One size does not fit all in the city. For some, it's equivalence. For
are
some,
they
it's
going to pull out? Are they threatening to pull out? Are they going to relocate to Paris, to Frankfurt, to New York?
Look, Finance is global. The competition to London is New York, Singapore. It's not Frankfurt,
But
Paris,
you haven't
or Dublin.
answered my question.
And
Would you be
Passporting is
prepared?
a
Would you be
precondition.
prepared for a
Passporting is a
special deal?
precondition.
Would you be prepared for a special deal in terms of the single market and retaining the sort of access we have now for certain industries like the financial services?
Well, the answer to that is the UK needs to have a clean Brexit in terms of sovereignty and migration
So no.
being protected. And then on top of that, as has been articulated, a bespoke deal that suits the EU, the UK. And out of that, there's no doubt in my mind that London is going to remain the financial centre.
Why are you not more confident about it?
I've spent 20 years working in and around the European Union. I'm also looking very closely at what things like Donald Tusk says when he says there will only be a hard Brexit. The fact is that it's not because these countries want to punish the UK, it's because they've got their own political realities and imperatives, and we've got to stop having this gung-ho hubris
We're not having
and this
gung-ho
casual approach, which seems to fail to understand how the rest of the EU is having to deal with this very complex issue. So the fact of the matter is, you cannot have your cake and eat it. We've got to find a bespoke deal, yes, but it's not going to be a full continuation of the passporting rights that we currently have, which also give you a seat at the table to shape future regulations. That's the reality.
We've run out.
And the banking and the financial service industry, which is 1.1 million jobs across the entire country, will take decisions based on their strategic imperatives.
We've almost run out of time. Just to come back to the original question, will the value of the pound fall further?
I think eventually the pound will be much stronger, but in
Right,
the near
but
term,
is it going to fall further
that's
now?
up to the markets. It depends what happens in the US
Do you
next week.
predict it will
but
fall?
the pound is fairly valued on many measures.
All right. I
can
suppose we shouldn't
promise you-
speculate, really, should we?
I can
Anyway,
promise you the pound will either go down, go up, or stay the same. Guarantee it.
all right, we
Something
can put a bet
agree
on that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.